Wyoming Territory, 1887. Lena Caro hit the dirt on her knees as 3 bounty men dragged her from the brush, their fists knotted in her hair while her wrists bled against the ropes. One shoved a gun barrel under her chin, another pawed at the half-tin star she clutched to her chest, laughing about how Judge Markham wanted her signed away before she stopped breathing. Her heart slammed so hard it felt like it might break through her ribs. Every breath a ragged choke as the trail went dead quiet around them. If I disappear here, no one will even remember my name. Before we continue, if you're watching this from anywhere in the world, leave your city name in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The lonely trail cutting through the upper ridge of Red Hollow had a way of swallowing sound. Even the wind went quiet there, like it knew better than to stir trouble among the pines. Malachi Shaw felt that hush before he even reached the bend. A pressure behind the ribs, the kind that warned a man a second before the world turned mean. His mare slowed on her own. Malachi didn't press her. Animals sensed trouble faster than men, and forcing a creature toward danger never favored anybody. He kept one hand low on the saddle horn, the other near the worn grip of his colt, not touching it, just knowing where it was. Then he heard it. Not a shout. Not yet. Just the thin hitch of a woman's breath, the kind dragged from the ribs when pride is fighting panic. Malachi rounded the bend. 3 bounty men had a woman cornered in the brush, their shadows stacking weight over something already broken. Rough men, hard miles on their boots, not the kind who checked if a beating made sense. The woman knelt in the dirt, one arm wrapped around her middle like she was holding herself together. Dirt streaked across her cheek. Blood dried at the corner of her mouth. In her fist, a glint of tin catching what little light the sky offered. A star. Half a star. The tallest bounty man grunted. "No use fightin', girl. Judge Markham wants that signature before you bleed out." She lifted her head, slow, stubborn, breathing shallow, but her eyes still bright with something that wasn't surrender. "I'm not a piece of property." The smallest bounty man snorted. "Could have fooled me. Folks only put bounties on things that belong to 'em." One reached down and grabbed a braid of her hair. Not hard, not soft, just enough to show he could choose either. Something slipped inside Malachi's chest, the way a knot gives under pressure. He didn't move at first. A black rancher alone on a ridge? Folks didn't carve headstones for men who picked the wrong fight. They just assumed coyotes handled it. He could have ridden on. No one would know. His ranch was near broke. He had a little girl to feed, fences to mend, debts to split with God. But that woman's voice hung in the air like a nail in a post. "I'm not a piece of property." Malachi pulled his mare to a stop. Let the silence breathe. Let the 3 men feel him there before he spoke. "That'll do," he said, voice low and worn. "Let her go." All 3 turned, annoyance shifting to recognition, the way dogs snarl when they realize the stranger at the gate isn't armed. "Well, I'll be," the tall one drawled. "Black Creek rancher himself. Malachi kept steady. Trail's wide enough for all of us. She's hurt. That's far enough. The small bounty man spat gravel laughter. Judge says she's wanted. Paperwork's easier when they can't fight back. Malachi's pulse beat once, hard, behind the ear. Then the tall one said it, the thing that cooled the air around them. Judge wants her alive long enough to sign away the rights to that kid. After that, she's good as dirt. Malachi's fingers brushed the butt of his gun. Not a threat, just habit tied to an older grief. Josie's face flickered behind his eyes. Small, warm, safe, for now. Let her go, no trouble needs making out here. The tall man smirked. Trouble's already made, rancher. This woman's worth coin. And you just bought yourself into it. He yanked her hair. She hissed, but kept her fist clenched tight around the broken star. Malachi swung down from the saddle. The bounty men shifted. Hands drifted to holsters. He didn't reach for his. He just stepped forward, boots steady. You don't want to do this. Not today. Silence pulled tight like rawhide. Then, Malachi drew. Not fast, not showy, just sure. The shot hit dirt at the tall man's boot. He jumped with a curse. The others flinched. That's your warning, Malachi said. Next one won't hit the dirt. The tall man spat. She ain't worth dying over, boys. Let's go. Their boots faded down the trail. When the world finally settled, Malachi turned to the woman. She wasn't looking at him. She stared at the half-star, trembling around its broken edge. Her lips quivered once. Then she whispered, barely there. Thank you. Malachi didn't trust his voice. He only nodded, stepped forward, and offered his hand. It shook more than he wanted it to. The woman's fingers barely curled around Malachi's wrist when he helped her stand. She rose slow, as if her bones had forgotten the weight of her own body. Once upright, her breath stuttered, and she leaned a moment against a juniper trunk, trying to hold on to a world that kept sliding sideways. Malachi didn't rush her. He just stood near, not touching, not crowding, letting her gather what little strength she had left. Her lips tightened as she pulled her torn shawl closer. They'll come back, she said, voice scraped thin. They don't leave nothing behind if Judge Markham puts a price on it. Malachi felt that name settle in the pit of his stomach, like a bad swallow of cold coffee. Markham had long arms in these parts, arms built from paper, signatures, and a judge's seal that turned lies into law. But Malachi let none of that show. They won't bother you tonight, he said. Not while I'm here. Her eyes flicked up, studying him, like she wasn't sure what kind of man made a promise like that, especially a man already carrying his own share of trouble. Her gaze drifted to his saddle, then to the mare waiting patiently on the trail. You should have kept riding, she murmured. Would have been easier. Maybe, Malachi said. But easier ain't the same as right. A tremor crossed her jaw. Not fear, not quite gratitude. Something caught between the two. He helped her toward the mare. She winced with every movement, pain gathering tight just below her ribs. When he lifted her into the saddle, she sucked in a breath through her teeth. But she didn't complain. Folks who knew real suffering seldom did. "Hold on," Malachi told her, mounting up behind. He kept one arm braced lightly around her waist. Not to claim her, just to keep her steady. She stiffened at first, unaccustomed to any touch that wasn't meant to hurt. But then her breath leveled, slow, careful, and she leaned just enough to stay balanced as the mare stepped off the ridge trail. Malachi guided the horse toward Black Creek Ranch. The sun had dipped low, drawing long shadows across the land. Shadows that made a man feel watched even when he wasn't. "You got a name?" he asked, the question soft enough to ignore if she wished. "Lena," she whispered. "Lena Caro." Her voice caught, like saying her name reminded her of someone who should have been there, but wasn't. Malachi nodded once. "I'm Malachi Shaw." She turned her head slightly, as if tasting the shape of his name. "You're the one that took in the little girl," she said. "The orphan from the church house." Malachi's hands tightened on the reins. Just a little. Barely a breath. But enough. "Josie," he said. "She was left in need. Didn't seem right to let her fend for herself." A faint note entered Lena's voice. Something fragile, wounded. "Most folks don't take in what the town spits out. Most folks don't sleep with peace at night either," Malachi replied. The trail dipped into a low wash. The mare's hooves thudded soft in the sand before climbing back onto hardpack. Lena's breathing shook now and then, and Malachi knew she was close to falling under. "Stay awake if you can," he murmured. "Just till we get home." She tried. He could feel it in the tension of her shoulders. But minutes later, her head tipped back against him, her body sagging with exhaustion. Malachi steadied her gently. "You're safe," he whispered, though he knew safety was a word the frontier rarely honored. Black Creek Ranch sat small against the open dark, lamplight blooming faint through the window like a promise stubborn enough not to die. Josie must have lit it. She always did when Malachi rode late. The child believed a lantern helped him find his way home, and Malachi never told her otherwise. As he rode into the yard, Lena stirred, eyes fluttering open with a jolt of fear. Her hand shot to her side, gripping the half-star. She'd kept hold of it even unconscious. Before Malachi could speak, the cabin door swung open. Josie barreled out barefoot, curls wild, tears shining because she'd been afraid and didn't hide that sort of thing. "Papa Kai, you're late!" She froze when she saw the woman on his horse. Josie's fingers drifted to the little chain around her neck, where another half-star glimmered in the lamplight. Lena saw it. Her whole body froze. Not with fear, not with pain, but with a stunned ache that drained the color from her face. Her hand lifted just an inch, as if reaching for something she didn't dare admit she recognized. Malachi swallowed hard and swung down, easing her into his arms before the moment could turn dangerous. She sagged against him, too weak to stand. Inside, he said quietly to Josie, boil water, bring cloth. Josie nodded and vanished into the cabin, bare feet pattering across the floorboards. Malachi carried Lena toward the door. She didn't resist, but her voice drifted up, faint as a ghost. That little girl, she swallowed. That star she wears. Malachi kept walking. Don't worry about that now. But it looks like I said don't, he whispered, harsher than he meant. Lena fell silent. Not from obedience, but because she no longer had strength to fight the words. Her head dropped against his shoulder. Malachi felt the tremor in his own hands as he pushed open the cabin door. He'd hoped the night would end easier than the day had started. But fate has a habit of waiting on the trail, just long enough for a man to ride right into it. The cabin held the kind of quiet that made a man hear his own breathing too loud. Malachi pushed the door shut with his heel, carrying Lena toward the cot near the stove. The lamplight threw a soft gold across her face, showing every mile of hurt she'd walked through. Josie was already pulling a stool close, setting down a bowl of hot water with the careful pride only children have when helping matters more than knowing how. Malachi lowered Lena onto the cot. Her eyes fluttered open, lids heavy, breath thin as paper. Heat radiated off her, fever brewing deep, the kind born from being hunted, starved and scared long enough for the body to start folding in on itself. You're all right, he murmured. Just breathe slow. Let it settle. Lena tried. A shiver ran through her, but she steadied herself against the coarse blanket. Her hand still clutched that half-star, knuckles white around it. She wouldn't let go, not even to brace herself. Josie moved closer, small fingers twisting the chain at her own throat. Malachi noticed. He froze. The two half-stars glinted in the lamplight, just a breath apart, just a second from touching. Lena's gaze drifted, first to her own hand, then to Josie's necklace. When the shapes registered, her eyes widened. Not in recognition exactly, but in something deeper, something that hurt. Where did she get that? She whispered, voice hoarse. Josie blinked up at Malachi, waiting for him to answer, and that waiting made panic tighten his ribs. He didn't answer. Couldn't. Instead, he reached for a clean cloth, dipped it in hot water, steam rising in slow curls. He pressed it gently to the cut along Lena's hairline. She hissed, but didn't pull away. It's just a thing she was given, Malachi said finally. Too quick, too clipped. Doesn't matter now. Lena watched him with a softness that hurt more than suspicion would have. Everything matters when a child's involved, she murmured. He knew that too well, knew it down to the bone. But he didn't reply. Didn't let the thought take shape. He kept his hands busy, wiping dirt from her cheek, brushing blood from her temple, checking the bruises blooming across her ribs. She endured each touch with a quietness that made him look on now and then, ashamed by how used she was to pain. Josie, perched beside the cot, studied Lena with wide, solemn eyes. Children in the West grew up too fast. They sensed danger quicker than adults sometimes. "Ma'am," Josie whispered, "you looked like you was crying when Papa carried you." Malachi stiffened. "Josie." But Lena managed a faint smile, cracked but real. "Sometimes folks cry inside, sweetheart," she said. "Sometimes it don't reach the eyes." Josie nodded, even if the heaviness of the thought sat too big on her small shoulders. The girl tucked a blanket around Lena's waist, gentle as a morning breeze. As she leaned in, the half-star on her necklace slipped forward, swinging into the lamplight. Lena saw it again, saw the jagged break, the crooked edge, the way the metal caught the light in the exact same off-color shine as her own piece. The whole room held its breath. Lena raised her half-star, hand trembling. Josie's eyes followed, confused but drawn to it. Another inch, and the two pieces would touch. Malachi's hand shot out, not harsh, but firm, closing Lena's fingers around her star before it met the girl's. "That's enough," he said, voice lower than he meant, rougher too. Lena stared at him, confusion sliding into realization. Not full understanding, just the shape of a truth she wasn't ready for and he wasn't willing to name. Her breathing shifted, shallow at first, then steadier as she wrestled with the ache inside. "You know something," she said softly. "Something you ain't saying." He didn't nod, didn't deny, just folded the cloth again and wiped her brow, as if keeping his hands busy might keep the truth from escaping. Josie looked between them, worry tightening her small face. "Papa Kai, did I do something wrong?" Malachi knelt, bringing himself level with her. "No, baby. You ain't done a thing wrong. Not now. Not ever." Lena watched that too. Watched the tenderness, the quiet oath in his tone. And something in her face shifted. Not anger, not yet. Just a question she pushed down because her body couldn't afford to rise with it. Her head dipped back onto the pillow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," Malachi said. "Trouble came looking. You just happened to be standing in its way." A faint laugh escaped her, or tried to, before dissolving into a wince. Josie tucked the blanket again. "Papa Kai says folks get better faster when someone stays with them. You want me to stay?" Lena swallowed. If you want to." "I do," Josie said simply. Malachi stood slow, feeling the room tighten with questions he wasn't ready to touch. He set another log in the stove, the crackle filling the heavy silence. Outside, the wind picked up, slow at first, then scraping around the eaves the way it did before the weather changed. Inside, the lamplight flickered across the two half-stars, one lying clenched in a feverish hand, one resting against the tiny heartbeat of a child. They didn't touch. Not tonight. Malachi made sure of that. But the truth between them, sharp, waiting, hungry, was already awake. Red Hollow woke early, same as any hard town clawing for its place on the map. But Gossip woke earlier, before the sun crested the ridge, before coffee boiled in the saloons, before Pastor Coleman lit his scripture lamp, the whispers were already crawling door to door. Malachi didn't know that yet. He only knew the wrong kind of quiet when he rode into town for supplies. Quiet that pressed against a man's back like the muzzle of a hidden gun. The street held its usual dust, its usual creaking signs. But something had shifted beneath it. A tone too sharp to ignore. Folks watched him. Not the usual watchfulness. A black man in Red Hollow got plenty of that. But today was different. Meaner. Like they'd been handed the same story and were waiting to see how he fit into it. He tied his mare outside the general store. She tossed her head once, uneasy. Malachi rubbed her neck, calming her with a low sound, then stepped inside. Conversation died, the way it always did when he walked in. But instead of drifting back to life, it stayed dead. Eyes followed him, sharp and shiny over barrels of flour and bolts of cloth. Mrs. Handley stood stiff behind the counter. "Morning, Mrs. Handley," Malachi said. She nodded without looking up. "Morning, Mr. Shaw. Heard you had company out at your place." Malachi's jaw tightened, though his face stayed calm. "Just helping someone hurt on the trail, same as any decent soul would." A man snorted. Another muttered, "Decent's a stretch." And then, louder than necessary, "Heard he's harboring a runaway woman. Heard she abandoned her own kin. Ain't right, a man taking in trash like that." Malachi didn't turn. He knew the shape of those words. Blows meant for the belly, not the ears. Mrs. Handley shoved a sack of coffee forward a little too fast. "Town's troubled, Mr. Shaw. Pastor's been preaching hard on the subject of wayward mothers. Folks got thoughts." Malachi's nostrils flared, but his voice stayed even. "Pastor's free to preach. I'm free to help someone bleedin' in the dirt." A heavy step sounded behind him from Weldon. Big man, slow-moving, eyes like cold gravel, leaned against the doorframe. "Morning, Shaw," he said. "Word is you got yourself mixed up in something Judge Markham's taken a particular interest in." Malachi kept his back straight. "Judge can come see me if he wants to ask questions." Weldon scratched his jaw. "He might, especially with the posters he's been printing." A chill scraped down Malachi's spine. "Posters?" Weldon tilted his head toward the community board. "Says the woman you're keepin' was declared unfit. Says she left her young'un at the church and went runnin'. Says Markham's given coin to bring her back." Whispers rippled through the store like dry leaves skittering across a porch. Lies were dangerous currency in these parts, and Markham minted them like silver dollars. "What else the posters say?" Malachi asked, voice low. Weldon shrugged. "Says she ain't safe round children. Says she's unstable. Says she's wanted for signing a confession the church never received." And there it was, the knife behind the words. Josie. They were painting Lena as the kind of woman who'd harm a child, fuel for any fire Markham wanted to spark. Malachi's stomach twisted, heat rising sharp, untempered. He took his supplies without another word and stepped outside. Sure enough, nailed to the board, fresh ink, crisp paper, Markham's signature sprawled bold as if truth belonged to him. Lena Caro, wanted for abandonment, fraud, endangerment of a minor, return alive to Judge Markham of Red Hollow. Malachi stared until the lines blurred. Anger curled slow inside him, like a fuse burning too steady to put out. Behind him, someone said, "If the judge wants her, the judge gonna get her. Man like Malachi ain't standing in the way." Another muttered, "Town's got enough trouble. Don't need his kind bringing strays." Malachi turned, slow and deliberate. The men stepped back half a pace. He didn't raise his kimun. Voice didn't touch his weapon. He just looked at them. "You talk like that 'cause you know she's alone," he said softly. "And folks with nothing behind them are easy to step on. But you step on her. You step on me. And I don't break easy." Silence fell so hard even the dust held still. Sheriff Weldon cleared his throat, uneasy. "Judge Markham'll want a word, Shaw. Says he's coming by your ranch tomorrow." Malachi wanted to spit in the dirt, but he kept his jaw tight. "Let him come." He swung onto his mare and rode out before Weldon could add another word. The wind hit him sharp as he left town, carrying the sting of every whisper, every stare. He'd walked into Red Hollow needing supplies. He rode out knowing war was coming. Not the kind fought with rifles, the kind fought with truth and lies, and a half-star that matched another too perfectly to ignore. The storm rolled in slow that evening. Not the kind that split the sky, but the kind that lingered, heavy and undecided, like it didn't yet know what it wanted to break. Malachi felt it gathering as he worked beside the cabin, chopping wood in a rhythm slower than usual. The weight in his chest made each swing feel like lifting through mud. Inside, he heard Lena's breath now and then, thin, wavering, but stronger than it had been hours ago. Fever had loosened its grip slightly, though she still shifted with quiet groans that slid under a man's ribs. Josie had stayed close all day, perched on a stool, elbows on her knees, watching with a solemn patience no child should have had to learn. By dusk, Malachi stepped in, wiping dust from his hands. The lamplight softened the cabin's edges, and for one quiet moment, he let himself look at the two of them. The woman barely holding on to herself, and the child holding herself small like the whole world might crack if she moved too loud. "You doing all right, Short Stack?" he asked. Josie nodded, but her eyes didn't leave Lena. "She keeps waking up 'cause she hurts." Lena shifted then, breath hitching with a sharp pull. Her hand searched blindly along the blanket until it brushed the cot's frame. Josie moved closer, laying her small hand over Lena's. "Easy," Malachi murmured, stepping toward them. But something changed right then. Lena's eyes fluttered open, fever-glazed, unfocused, and she whispered a soft sound. Not a word. More like a memory trying to rise through fog. Her lips trembled and a tune slipped out, thin as a thread. Just 4 notes. Old. Worn. The kind of melody mothers hummed to babies before they even knew what words were. Malachi froze mid-step. Josie stiffened like a struck match. Then, without warning, The child whispered the end of the line. Same pitch, same rise, same fall. A perfect echo. That's... Josie blinked. That's Mama Eliza's song. Lena's breath caught. A shiver broke across her face as if the melody itself had jolted her awake. Her eyes sharpened. Not clear, but aware in a deeper place fever couldn't reach. I know that tune, she rasped. Sang it once, long ago. Malachi felt the air shift. His heartbeat slowed, then thudded heavy, like it was bracing. He should have moved, should have spoken, should have broken the moment before it grew teeth. But he didn't. Couldn't. Josie leaned forward, voice soft as cotton. Mama Eliza said she didn't make that song. Said it came from the woman that had me first. Malachi swallowed hard, tongue thick, useless. Josie, but Josie kept going. Said it was the only thing she remembered from her. The room went too quiet. Even the storm outside paused, listening. Lena's hand rose halfway to her mouth before falling limp. Tears didn't come. There wasn't enough water left in her. But the look in her eyes held every kind of breaking. I used to sing that, she whispered, when she was small. Her voice cracked. Before they took her. Malachi stepped in sharply, too sharp. That's fever talk, he said, though the words burned. Don't put meaning where there ain't proof. Lena didn't argue, didn't even look at him. She only looked at Josie, drinking in her face like someone starved finding something they didn't know they'd been starving for. Josie touched Lena's wrist, small hand trembling. You feel like something I remember, she whispered. But I don't know from where. Malachi's chest tightened. Josie, he warned, softer, almost pleading. She turned to him. Papa Kai, why do you look scared? Her honesty, her openness, that made the truth more dangerous than any lie Markham could print. Malachi forced his breath slow, the way he did when breaking a wild colt or facing a man who wanted him to draw first. I ain't scared, he lied gently. Just tired. Lena's gaze lifted to him. Slow, heavy, full of a hurt she didn't voice. You're hiding something, she whispered. You don't owe me the truth, Malachi Shaw, but you owe it to her. The words landed deep, deeper than he could show. He crouched beside the cot, rinsed the cloth, pressed it to her forehead. Save your strength, he murmured. There'll be time for talk when fever ain't talking through you. But they both knew fever wasn't the one speaking. Josie watched him, quiet, puzzled, trusting, and that trust hit harder than any bullet. Lena's breathing slowed, but she kept her eyes on Josie until exhaustion dragged her under. Even then, her fingers curled toward the girl, not the star. She feels familiar, Josie whispered. Malachi forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes hurt folks remind us of folks we lost. That's all. He ruffled her hair, gentle, almost trembling. Get some rest, short stack. Josie nodded and curled into her bed, though she kept glancing at Lena until sleep finally took her. Malachi stood alone in the dim cabin, listening to their breathing, the uneven rasp of a woman who'd lost everything, and the soft, steady inhale of the child he'd sworn to protect. Outside, thunder rolled, low and distant, like the land itself was warning him. The truth was coming, and it wasn't going to wait for him to be ready. Morning crawled in slow, the way cold light does after a night of too much thinking. Malachi hadn't slept. Not really. He'd sat by the stove, elbows on his knees, watching lamplight play across the floorboards, while Lena breathed in restless fits behind him. Every so often, Josie whimpered in her sleep, and each sound cut him like a thin blade. He told himself he was keeping watch. Truth was, he was afraid that if he closed his eyes, everything would slide out from under him. When the knock came, it wasn't loud, but it was sure. The kind of knock from a man who came with orders rather than questions. Malachi rose with a stiff breath, opened the door, and found Deputy Tommy Rhodes on the porch, hat in hand, face drawn in the kind of apology a lawman makes when he's delivering trouble to a friend. "Malachi," Tommy said, "didn't want to come this early, but Markham insisted." Malachi didn't step aside. "You bringing bad news, or just carrying the smell of it?" Tommy rubbed the back of his neck. "Judge Markham's called you to town. Says it's urgent legal business. Says it concerns the child." A stillness fell inside Malachi, not startled, but the dead calm breath before a man draws steel. "Josie?" His voice dropped, rough. "Why?" Tommy shifted, boots scraping the porch. "Markham's claiming new papers turned up. Says the girl ain't yours to keep. Says a certain woman abandoned her years back. Says there's documented proof." Behind Malachi, Lena stirred on the cot, a soft groan slipping through cracked lips. Tommy's eyes flicked past Malachi's shoulder. "That her?" he asked quietly. Malachi blocked the view. "She's hurt. Someone left her to die on the ridge. That's all you need to know." Tommy didn't push it. He'd seen enough ugliness in Red Hollow to know a woman didn't land on a doorstep like that by choice. He lowered his voice. "Markham's coming for her too. Says she's tied to the case. Says she's wanted alive and available for testimony. Said that real, careful-like." Heat gathered in Malachi's jaw. "Testimony for what?" Tommy met his eyes, regret heavy. "For signing over the kid." Lena's weak voice drifted out. "He's still after her?" Tommy stiffened. Hadn't realized she was awake. Malachi stepped aside so she wouldn't strain her neck. Her face was pale, sweat gathering along her temple, but her gaze, sharp, too sharp for someone half in fever. Tommy cleared his throat. "Ma'am, Judge Markham claims you left a child at the church house. Says you ran." Lena's fingers curled tight in the blanket. I didn't run. Her voice cracked, thin, pained. I never left her. They took her from me. Malachi shot her a look, not warning, not silencing, just protective, instinctive. Tommy nodded slowly. Ma'am, I ain't sayin' I believe him. I know Markham's twisted more words than he's spoken truth, but the man's got the court behind him, and he's comin' down hard. He wants the child, Lena whispered. He doesn't care how he gets her. Malachi's pulse thudded. Josie breathed softly in her little bed, steady, trusting, unaware of how close the world pressed in. Tommy, Malachi said, voice low, steady. What's he plannin'? Tommy hesitated. The kind of hesitation a man makes before delivering something sharp. He's got an order to seize the child at sundown. Says if you don't bring her in by then, he'll come take her, and he'll bring men who won't think twice. Lena pushed herself upright, breath shaking. No, she rasped. He can't. She's just a little girl. Her words broke, turning into something raw behind her teeth. Tommy looked at her, then at Malachi. Judge says you're harboring a dangerous woman. Says she's unstable. Says she's manipum. That's enough, Malachi snapped, voice rising past steady. Tommy nodded quickly. I didn't come to argue. I came to warn you. I got 2 hours before I'm expected back. Use 'em wise. Time 200 nims. He placed his hat on his head. I ain't sayin' run, but if you stay, you better be ready to stand in front of something sharp. Thank you, Tommy, Malachi said. When the deputy rode off, Malachi closed the door slow, like maybe the act itself could hold the world at bay a moment longer. But the room didn't feel safe anymore. It felt smaller, tighter, like truth and danger were pushing through the walls. Lena tried to sit straighter, gripping the cot's edge. I should leave, she forced out. I shouldn't drag trouble here, not with a child in the house. Malachi shook his head immediately. You ain't leavin' in your state, and you ain't facin' him alone. You don't understand, Lena whispered, pain carving lines into her face. If I walk out that door, it won't save her. It'll serve her up. Malachi's breath trembled once. Josie is all I got left in this world, Lena. And she's all I ever had, Lena replied, voice small but burning. I lost her once. I won't lose her again. The room held the two truths, coals glowing close to flame. Josie stirred, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Papa Kai, why's everybody talking so loud? The innocence in her voice almost made Malachi sink to his knees. He crouched and pulled her close. Everything's fine. Short stack. It wasn't. They all knew it wasn't. Lena watched them. Pain tightening her features. Guilt mixing with something like longing. Something she didn't dare name. Malachi, she whispered. He looked up. She held his gaze with fragile certainty. We can't run from this. He didn't answer, because in his bones, he knew she was right, and in his heart, he feared she was right. Outside, a gust of wind struck the window, sharp enough to rattle the frame. Judge Markham wasn't coming tomorrow. He was already on his way. Night settled over Black Creek Ranch in a slow, heavy way, like a blanket laid over a wounded animal, warm but suffocating. The sky outside the windows had gone from blue to soot, and the lantern on Malachi's table flickered with a stubborn, tired flame. Lena slept fitfully on the cot, breath tight, body unsure whether it trusted this place enough to heal. Malachi stood at the counter, hands braced, staring at nothing and everything at once. His shoulders carried that quiet tremble of a man who'd held too much weight for too long. When Lena woke again, it wasn't with fear, just weariness, carved deep into bone. "Malachi," she breathed, "you're still standing." He didn't look back. "Ain't much use lying down when the world's about to knock down your door." She pushed up on her elbows, wincing as pain drew tight across her ribs. "You blame me for this? For him coming?" Malachi shook his head. Slow, deliberate. "Markham's been coming for a long time. You just made him honest about it." Silence stretched between them. Not cold, but the kind right before a man decides whether he's gonna open a locked door inside himself. "Josie," Lena whispered. "She looks like—" He cut her off, not with anger, but exhaustion. "I know." She waited, just looked at him. Eyes that had seen too much, yet still asked for truth. Something inside Malachi loosened. He turned, leaned against the counter, crossed his arms, exhaled like a man shedding a decade. "She was barely 2 weeks old," he said. "Eliza found her wrapped in a church quilt out on the steps, snow clinging to her hair." Lena's breath hitched, but she didn't interrupt. "Eliza always wanted a child," he went on, voice low, steady, "but her body wouldn't hold one. When she brought Josie home, I knew it weren't right. Papers too clean, too rushed." He rubbed the back of his neck, memory shadowing his eyes. "Markham signed him himself. Said the mother refused to leave a name. Said the babe was abandoned. No kin, no claim." Malachi laughed once, dry, humorless. "And I let him say it. I let him write it into truth." Silence pressed close, sharp, heavy. Lena spoke softly. "Because you wanted Eliza to be happy." Malachi nodded. The woman had gone through hell trying to hold a family together. When she saw that baby, she looked alive for the first time in years. "And you loved her," Lena murmured. "More than I'd admit to anyone but God." The lantern hissed as the wick shifted. "When Eliza died, Josie was all I had left of her, and I told myself truth didn't matter. Not if the child was loved, not if I raised her right." His hand tightened around the lantern handle, trembling. "But sometimes," he said, voice rougher, "I'd hear Josie humming a tune I never taught her, or saying a word I didn't know she knew, or looking out toward the ridge like she was searching for something she couldn't name." Lena pressed a fist to her mouth, fighting a tremor. She remembered, she whispered. Maybe not with her head, Malachi said softly, but with her bones. Maybe. A long moment passed. Then Lena's voice rose again, shaken but steady. I never abandoned her, Malachi. The night she was taken, I bled more than a woman ought to survive. I woke in the church cellar. They told me she died. They buried a blanket and told me it was my daughter. Her voice cracked. Markham signed the papers that night. I never saw her again. Malachi bowed his head, not in shame, in grief. I should have known, he said. Should have seen the way he moved her through those papers too fast. Should have asked questions. You were grieving, Lena whispered. People don't see clear through grief. Doesn't excuse it, he murmured. No, Lena said softly, but it explains it. She shifted, wincing, fighting to sit straighter. Malachi, the truth isn't your enemy. Markham is. He looked toward Josie, sleeping with her cheek pressed against her small hand, then toward the door, where Judge Markham's shadow seemed to hang like a storm waiting to break. Tomorrow, Lena said, voice quiet but firm, we go to town. We tell them everything. Let him rage. Let him lie. Truth won't break. It waits. Malachi closed his eyes, letting the air tremble in his chest. You asking me to risk losing her? No, Lena whispered. I'm asking you not to lose yourself. He opened his eyes, and something steady, something long buried, had returned there. I'll stand with you, he said. Lena gripped the cot's edge, steadying herself. And I'll stand with you. It wasn't a promise of love. It wasn't a pact. Just two broken people choosing the same direction, even if the road ahead carried gallows on either side. Malachi blew out the lantern. The room fell into soft darkness, silver moonlight outlining their silhouettes. Tomorrow would demand everything they had. Tonight, they let the truth breathe. Sunday mornings in Red Hollow always carried a particular kind of quiet, one stitched from church bells, dust, and the judgment of folks who wore their righteousness like Sunday coats. Malachi never much cared for that quiet. Always made him feel like he was standing on the wrong side of a line he didn't draw. But this Sunday felt like walking into a storm without the sky showing a single cloud. Malachi rode into town slow, Lena beside him on his bay mare, Josie perched up front, small arms looped around his ribs. She didn't understand the weight hanging over them. She just hummed under her breath. That same little tune that had broken both adults clean in half-days before. Lena heard it too. Malachi felt her stiffen. Easy now, he murmured. Didn't know who he was saying it to. Lena, himself, or whatever God was watching this unfold. The moment they crossed Main Street, conversation died like a flame hit by wind. Heads turned, doors cracked open. Men stopped sweeping dust just to stare. Some looked curious, most looked angry, a few looked ready to spit. A woman whispered, "That's her, the Caro woman." Another muttered, And Shaw brought her right into town with the child? Someone else hissed, "Filth follows filth." Josie shrank against Malachi's chest. His hand settled on her back, steady, warm, unmoving. Lena didn't shrink. She sat straighter, though her body trembled under the effort. Shawl tight, bruises unhideable, breaths taken in thin, careful sips. They stopped at the courthouse steps. Judge Markham stood at the top, Pastor Coleman at his side, 2 deputies flanking him. Markham's polished vest gleamed, gold watch chain shining like it was proud of him. "Malachi Shaw," Markham called, voice carrying like a sermon. "I expected you earlier." Malachi dismounted slow. "Didn't say I'd come running." Markham's smile tightened. "You brought the child. Good. This matter requires clarity in public view." His gaze slid to Lena, slow, slicing. "And you brought the woman." Lena's fingers tightened on the saddle horn. "My name is Lena Caro." "Yes," Markham said. "That is what you claim." Pastor Coleman folded his hands, eyes cold as unlit stone. "For the sake of the town," he said, "we must resolve the confusion surrounding the Caro woman and this child." "Confusion," Malachi echoed. "Funny word for a lie." Murmurs swept the crowd. Markham raised a hand, pretending calm. "As judge of this district," Markham began, "I must protect our community from dishonesty. This woman," he nodded toward Lena, "abandoned a newborn years ago, left the infant at the church steps and disappeared. We have records. We have witnesses." Lena swayed. Malachi stepped half an inch closer. But Lena spoke first, voice thin, then gathering strength like a trembling flame. "I never abandoned my child." A gasp swept across the crowd. Markham's jaw twitched, but Lena continued. "I woke in the church cellar without her. They told me she died. They buried a blanket and called it a grave. I fought them. They held me down. The papers were signed without my name." Markham forced a smile, narrow and sharp. "A dramatic tale from a troubled mind. But tell us, Miss Caro, what proof do you offer?" Lena reached beneath her shawl, slow, shaking, and pulled out the half-tin star she had carried through fever, hunger, and hell. She held it up to the morning light. "This," she whispered, "was on her blanket. I made it myself." The crowd leaned in, pulled by its own gravity. Markham scoffed. "A trinket could belong to anyone." Malachi's voice came quiet, steady as a drawn line. "Funny, seeing as the girls got the other half." Murmurs rose. Markham stiffened. "Bring the child forward," he ordered. Josie clung harder to Malachi, but he lifted her gently, setting her on her feet, hand firm on her shoulder. "Sweetheart," Lena whispered, voice breaking, like thin ice. "Could you show them?" Josie blinked, confused, then reached beneath her collar and pulled out the other half of the carved tin star. The world went silent. A man muttered, stunned, That's no coincidence. Pastor Coleman stepped closer. The edges, they match. Markham's voice cracked sharp, panic leaking through. The child was given that ornament by the church, nothing more. No, Lena said softly. I carved the ridge marks myself, every line. She held her half out. May I see yours, little one? Josie looked at Malachi. He nodded, though his throat felt tight as rope. Josie placed her half in Lena's trembling palm. Lena pressed her piece to it. The fit was perfect, line for line, scar for scar. A sound escaped Lena's throat, part sob, part prayer. Josie stared at the star. Ma'am, why does this feel warm? Malachi's heart clenched hard, had to steady himself. The crowd erupted, shocked, angry, whispering, believing, and Judge Markham's smile finally cracked. Enough, he snapped. This proves nothing. Anyone could fabricate. But the crowd wasn't listening, and for the first time, Malachi saw fear flicker behind the judge's polished eyes. For a long heartbeat, Red Hollow stood still as stone. Lena held both halves of the star in her palms, like they were made of breath. Josie watched with wide, wondering eyes, small fingers trembling as if she felt something rising out of the ground beneath them. Something old. Something true. Something that had been waiting far too long. Malachi felt the weight of the moment settle across his shoulders. Not just truth breaking open, but years he'd spent limping around it finally catching up. And then the town started whispering. Lord above, they match. That ain't right. That ain't coincidence. Markham's been lying to us? Who could carve two halves that fit like that? The judge stepped down one stair, then another, anger twitching at the corners of his mouth. Everyone quiet, Markham barked. Listen to your judge. But nobody quieted. Not this time. Lena lifted her head. She didn't look furious. She didn't look triumphant. She looked like a mother seeing a ghost turn back into flesh. She was mine, she whispered. All those years, she was mine. Her voice cracked, soft as broken bark. Malachi's chest tightened, not in jealousy, not in fear, but with the sharp ache of truth finally choosing to stand upright. Markham saw the tide turning. He pushed forward with a slick smile that never reached his eyes. This is sentimental trickery, he said. A woman trying to claim what isn't hers. That star could easily be... A new voice cut him off. Judge, Deputy Tommy Rhodes called from the crowd. I think you ought to stop talking a while. Markham stiffened. Deputy Rhodes, you forget your place. Tommy walked forward slow, pushing back his hat, sun glinting off the badge pinned crooked on his chest. No, sir, he said quietly. I think I'm remembering it real clear. He glanced at Lena, then Malachi. I was called to the church storeroom once, Tommy said. Saw the adoption file. Saw where someone scraped off a name and wrote unknown mother instead. A ripple ran through the gathering. Lena pressed a hand over her mouth. Malachi shut his eyes, pain scraping through him like a rough blade. Markham's face darkened, wolfish. "You accusing an officer of the court?" he growled. Tommy didn't back down. "I'm saying those papers didn't look right then, and they damn sure don't look right now." Markham hesitated. Just a flicker, but enough for the crowd to smell blood. Lena knelt, placed her half of the star into Josie's hands like returning something sacred. Josie closed her fingers around it. "Do you want it back?" she whispered. Lena's breath faltered. "Only if you want me to have it, little one." Malachi watched the girl study her face. The bruises, the hunger, the hollowed eyes. Then Josie reached out, tiny palm against Lena's cheek. "You look like me," she said softly. The sound Lena made wasn't a sob. It was quieter than that, like a shutter opening in a long abandoned cabin. Malachi exhaled, shaky, heart torn between loss and relief. Markham saw the tide fully turn. Desperation bled into his voice. "This changes nothing," he snapped. "I will petition the federal court. I will have the child removed from this dangerous situation." "Dangerous," Malachi echoed, stepping forward. "She ain't been safer in her life than she is with me." Markham sneered. "A black rancher with no blood claim, and a disgraced woman with a history of derange." Lena straightened, body swaying, but voice steel. "You stole her." The words rang like a church bell. "You took her from me the night I nearly died. You let them bury a blanket instead of a child. You signed away my motherhood like it was paperwork." Markham opened his mouth, but the town wasn't with him anymore. A rancher muttered, "A man who lies about children'll lie about anything." Another murmured, "You see the way he's sweating?" A woman added, "I heard he made money off finder's fees for orphans." Markham lunged toward the child. He barely took 2 steps before Malachi moved. He didn't shove him, didn't raise a fist. He just stepped between them. Shoulders squared, breath slow and deep. A quiet line drawn by a man who'd drawn too many of them in his life. Markham snarled, "This isn't over." "No," Malachi murmured, "but it's damn sure different now." He looked at Lena. She nodded, small, tired, brave. The halves of the star glinted together in Josie's hands. Tin warmed by the heat of 3 hearts that had spent far too long living separate stories. And in that moment, Red Hollow understood. The truth wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a story someone could twist. It was solid, carved metal. 2 halves no man alive could separate again. They slipped into the alley beside the courthouse, the roar of Red Hollow still boiling behind them. Malachi kept Josie close to his leg, one hand firm on her shoulder. Lena leaned against the brick wall, breath thin from pain, but her eyes sharp, wide awake in a way a wounded woman shouldn't be. For the first time all morning, there was no shouting, no judging eyes, just the 3 of them and the hard breath of truth hanging between their bodies. Josie looked up. "Papa Kai, Did I do something wrong? Malachi knelt, lowering himself to her small height. Not one thing, short stack. You were braver than any grown man out there. Josie nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her little shoulders. She clutched both halves of the tin star tight to her chest. Lena stared at that star like it was both salvation and a knife. Malachi. Her voice was soft, wary. You need to hear something before Markham twists the world any further. He didn't want to hear it. He knew that in his bones, but he nodded anyway. Lena steadied herself on the wall. I don't want to take her from you. Those words hit him harder than any blow he'd taken in his life. You're her mother, he whispered. I'm also a stranger she doesn't know, Lena said quietly. But you're the one who brushed her hair, taught her to tie her shoes, held her when she had fevers. You built her world. Malachi felt something hot rise to his throat. Fear, hope, grief, knotted tight together. I can't lose her, he said. Not after burying Eliza. Not after building my whole life around keeping that girl safe. Lena's eyes softened. I'm not asking you to lose her. I'm asking you not to hide her. The words struck him clean, because that was the real battle. Not Markham, not the town, himself. He had built his whole world around one truth. Josie was his. But the story had grown larger than that. Lena's voice trembled but held, steady. I spent years thinking my baby was in the ground. Now she's alive, holding the star I carved for her with my own hands. But if you tell me I should walk away to keep her safe, I will. Malachi's breath shook. Don't you dare, he whispered. That ain't what Josie needs, and it sure as hell ain't what truth needs. He stood, rubbing a hand over his face, air tight, world waiting for the words he'd been choking back since the moment he picked Lena up off the dirt. A child ain't property, he said softly. Ain't something a man keeps to himself like a fence post. She deserves both of us, if both of us mean to do right by her. Lena blinked, stunned, hope trembling under her ribs like a trapped bird. Malachi looked between them, woman and child, and understood the choice was already made. I'll stand before the whole damn town, he said, voice low but certain. And I'll tell the truth myself. I won't own her. I'll raise her. With you, if you'll stand with me. A tear slipped down Lena's cheek, silent, disbelieving. Josie tugged at Malachi's sleeve. Papa Kai, is she my mama? Malachi looked at Lena. She nodded once. Small, scared, but honest. His voice trembled. Yeah, short stack. She is. Josie stepped toward Lena and placed the half-star into her hand. And for the first time, Lena held something she had lost years ago. Warm, living, breathing. Her daughter. They hadn't taken more than 10 steps back toward the courthouse when a shout split through the street. There! Right there! Stop 'em! Judge Markham's voice cracked like a whip. The crowd turned as one, a restless tide of dust and boots. Malachi shifted Josie behind his leg, instinct sharp as a fast draw. Lena braced against the hitching post, breathing through pain that should have put her on the ground. Markham stomped down the steps, red-faced, trembling with fury. "Deputies," he barked, "take the woman into custody and seize the child before they run." The crowd surged, some hungry for spectacle, others too scared to move. Malachi stepped forward, jaw tight. "You lay a hand on that girl, and I'll—" "You'll what, Shaw?" Markham sneered. "You think your word matters here? A black rancher and a fever-mad woman? The law is on my side." Malachi didn't raise his fists. He didn't need to. His stillness was sharper. Lena straightened, despite her ribs screaming. Her voice came low, but it carried. "You stole my daughter. Then you buried the truth. That ain't law. That's a thief's shadow." "Arrest them!" Markham snapped. A deputy reached for his cuffs, and then a metallic click cut through the air. Tommy Rhodes stepped from between two wagons, revolver raised, hands steady in a way no young deputy's hands ought to be. "That's enough," Tommy said. Markham spun. "Rhodes, put that gun down before—" "I ain't putting down nothing," Tommy said, voice calm, almost sorrowful. "Not while you try stealing a child twice." Gasps rippled. "Tommy's picking a side," someone whispered. Tommy kept the barrel leveled. "Judge, you know them papers were tampered with. I saw the scratch marks. I saw the ink scraped. And I ain't blind to what kind of men profit off orphans with no names." Markham's face went purple. "You're finished, Rhodes. You'll lose that badge. Time 800. Tommy shrugged. "Badge ain't worth much if it means following a liar." Behind him, something unexpected stirred. Widow Hargreaves, the same woman who once crossed the street to avoid Malachi, stepped forward. "Judge," she called, voice shaking but clear. "I'll testify. I seen you at the church that night, after midnight, with two men carrying a bundle that sure as hell wasn't dead." Another man stepped up, then a second woman, then old Mr. Cooper leaning on his cane. One by one, voices rose from dust and fear and years of swallowing what they knew. "We'll stand with them. We'll speak if the court asks. It's time someone did." Markham's power cracked right there, loud enough Malachi could almost hear it splinter. The judge's eyes darted, desperate, cornered. "This is mob justice," he spat. "This is chaos." "No," Malachi said quietly. "This is folks remembering they got a conscience." Markham staggered back a step. He wasn't beaten by guns, not Tommy's, not Malachi's. He was beaten by truth turning its face toward him. "You haven't won," he hissed. "I'll take this to federal circuit. Get the child removed. Get you all charged." "Then go," Malachi said, voice low as thunder. "Do what you think you need. But the girl ain't going nowhere with you today." Josie slipped her small hand into Lena's. Lena's breath shuddered, but she held on. Tommy lowered his gun only when Markham finally tore himself away, stomping toward his horse like a man running from his own shadow. The crowd parted. Nobody bowed. Nobody stepped aside out of respect. They just watched him leave. And in that stillness, Malachi felt something shift, something fragile, but real. A family wasn't born by blood today. It was born by truth. And truth, once freed, don't bow to any judge. 2.5 years later, Black Creek Ranch didn't look richer, but it felt steadier, like a place that finally knew its own name. The wind no longer whistled through broken boards. Children's laughter scattered across the yard like stray cornmeal, and the porch held 3 boots every morning instead of 2. Malachi stood there now, sanding the edge of a small wooden star he'd carved from an old fence rail. The grain didn't want to behave, so he worked slow, letting the wood tell him what shape it meant to be. Inside, Lena's voice drifted through the window. Soft, low, singing the same lullaby that once cracked open their whole world. Josie's giggle followed, bright as spring water. "Papa Kai," she called. "Mama says we can go riding after chores." Malachi smiled. Quiet. Easy. "That's so. Then you best finish sweepin', short stack." She darted back inside, braid bouncing, half-star necklace jingling against her collar. The tin pieces, hers and Lena's, had been reforged into one pendant. Hanging on a leather cord, Malachi braided himself. It shone like something reborn, not repaired. Lena stepped onto the porch. Her limp had faded, but a deeper calm lived in its place. She leaned on the post beside him, watching his hands shape the wooden star. "You making that for the doorway?" she asked. "Figure every home needs something to stand for it," Malachi said. "Something we built ourselves, not something stolen or split." She traced the star's edge with her thumb. "It's ours, then." "Ours," he echoed. He hung it on the porch beam, right above the place where 3 sets of footprints met in the dust every day. Lena looked at him, steady, grateful. "You came back for me on that trail," she whispered. "That was enough for all 3 of us." And under the wooden star, with the house warm behind them and the past finally laid to rest, Malachi believed her as the son own. Dust settles over Black Creek Ranch. We're reminded that some stories don't end with gunfire or galloping hooves, but with quieter victories. A child kept safe. A mother restored. A good man choosing truth over fear. Malachi, Lena, and little Josie didn't just build a home. They built a place where the past no longer has the power to wound, and the future feels steady for the first time in years. Maybe that's why these Western tales still matter. They remind us that courage often looks simple. Standing your ground, holding a hand that needs holding, speaking the truth when it costs you something. And in a world that changes faster than we can blink, stories like this help us remember the values that never should. If this tale touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me which moment stayed with you, or share your own memories of the old Westerns you grew up with. Your stories, your wisdom, they mean more than you know, and they help keep this little community alive. If you enjoyed this journey, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you don't miss the next ride down these dusty roads. Thank you for spending your time with us today. I hope this story carried you somewhere warm,